So how do you prevent a breach? This is, I wish there were fail-safes for every situation and we could make this 100% secure, but I think the old adage is when they talk with computer programmers, they say it's not when you get hacked, or if you get hacked, it's when you get hacked. And what we want to do is we really want to try to stop this as soon as possible and hopefully prevent anything from happening from the start. So these are what I call the low-hanging fruit of things that you can do and do fairly effectively and easily. And if you're on top of a lot of these things, it really will take care of a lot of your problems. Updating operating systems, that's one of the key things you can do. You want to make sure that any software you have, so I've got it twice here, one for software, just so if you're using your EHR, you want to make sure that EHR is always up to date, that you're using the most recent version. Your operating systems need to be updated. There are security updates that come out fairly regularly, and those need to be installed as soon as possible. Now, you don't want to do it in the middle of a workday. It's best to do it in the evening, maybe over weekends. Sometimes if you're doing a major system upgrade, say going from Windows 8 to Windows 10, you're going to want a whole weekend for your device to index your hard drive, because it's going to have to re-index everything. And that can slow your systems down. So just keep that in mind when you do these security updates or these major updates to your system. But it's very important that you do these. And these can solve a lot of problems, because usually when these security updates come out, that's when there's been a hack that's been released. That's when somebody has noticed something is happening, and that means that it needs to be addressed fairly quickly. If you have, putting an anti-malware software on your computers, you want to make sure that all attachments are being scanned. You want to make sure that if you're allowing people to use things like flash drives, that they're scanned when they're plugged into the systems. I would recommend that you start migrating away from those, since there's great cloud file sharing programs like Box and Sukasa and those sorts of things that will encrypt that information. They'll sign the BA agreement with you. I would start migrating away from those, because you have to keep in mind, once that information goes onto an external device, you lose control of that information. So and at that point, your job is really to keep control of that information, know what's happening with it, and if it's off your system and you can't log it, it's the same as if you don't have it at all. So making sure that you do, back to software, making sure you have that malware software in there, and it's constantly, and you want to keep that up to date, because new definitions are coming out constantly for that. So it's very important to keep that up to date. Training your staff, that is probably one of the most important. That's probably your weakest link in the chain of everything. If you've got your software up to date, you've got your malware software running, your operating system is up to date, the staff really becomes a crucial cog in that whole chain. Is you really want to look at it and say, okay, do they know I'm not supposed to open attachments from unexpected attachments from people, random emails, those sorts of things. Do they know what information they're allowed to talk about? What information maybe making sure that you have a social media policy so they know what they can release and what they can't release. We actually have seen some people get in trouble for posting things improperly on websites. So you want to be really, really careful about that, and make sure you've trained your staff on that. And also, they can be also a first line of defense, because if they notice screens are up that aren't supposed to be up, or something looks weird in the system, or something's changed, they can alert you and your IT staff that there's a problem. So making sure that you empower them also to notice and to speak out when they see changes in the systems. And probably the most important, and I think I've harped on this in probably every webinar we've done, is password security, and training your staff on that password security. That is the easiest way in, and it's the best way to keep somebody out. You want a difficult password that should be at least 10 characters long, should have upper and lowercase letters, numbers, special characters, and you should change those fairly regularly. And it's good practice also to make sure that people, if possible, are not using the same password for banking as well as social media, as well as to get in access to your EHR. You should have distinct passwords for different items, making sure that you're protecting them and that you're changing them regularly. Here, what I do and what I recommend for a lot of people is using password management programs. I use them. I think they're great. I think it's a great way to keep control of those passwords, make sure that they're constantly being updated and that you're using really difficult passwords. Personally, I use passwords that are in the 20 to 25 range if I can. If the system won't support it, I use the max of what a system will support. And you basically just have to remember your master password, which you want to make sure you use a very difficult password for that. But those programs really help out. Some of those programs would be like LastPass, 1Pass is another one, but you want to make sure that there's some pretty strict authentication on that also. And with passwords, when we speak about authentication, if you have the ability to turn on what we call two-factor authentication, which means you're using a secondary device to authenticate who you are. So that would be, there's a program called Google Authenticator that works really nicely. It's very universal. It could be that the system sends an email. So that there's a secondary code that has to go in so that you make sure that that person is who they say they are and that they're actually in control of the devices that they say they have. Encrypting information. Now, I know most of people will say, HIPAA doesn't explicitly say that you have to encrypt information. It's a recommendation or something that's addressable versus being a standard or something that's required. But in that same sentence, it actually says that you need to do a thorough risk assessment and determine if it's appropriate for your practice or your business. And in actuality, I've done a lot of risk assessments. I've done thousands of risk assessments for people, and I've yet to see somebody who has said to me, this is why we don't encrypt information, and said, okay, that's all right. I would say it's your get out of jail free card, because if encrypted information is released and there is no password and the key is not with it, that is considered not to be a breach. You don't have to report that, and it's a simple thing to do. All operating systems now, I think 7 is the last one that when it comes to Windows 7, you have to have, I think it's Elite or Professional in order to have what is called BitLocker. That's a free program. It'll encrypt your drive. You put password protection on there. If that device is stolen or you lose that device, you don't have to report that as a breach, because there is really no way that somebody can get in and steal that information, because it's password protected and that information is encrypted. And when it comes to the Mac operating system, it's File Vault 2, like the number 2. Again, free program. You'll notice little to no lag on your system at that point once you've encrypted information. Chips today are fast enough that they can process that information without any problems. So, and then making sure you're encrypting those mobile devices. Your phones should be password protected at all times. Think of the information you have on those devices. You have emails, if you're allowing emails to be accessed from your EHR. You could have encrypted and unencrypted emails depending on how patients are contacting you. We want to try to migrate them all to using an encrypted email platform, but that information is there. You may have personal financial information on that phone. You may have other identifying information that you don't want getting out. So it's really important that those are encrypted and they're password protected. iPhones are natively encrypted. You just want to make sure you turn on that password protection, that you keep it on. I recommend that you have somebody log in every time, and that with the with the thumbprint authentication on a lot of these phones, it's very easy to do and to set up, and it should be on at all times. If you're using Android or Windows phones, you do have to set up encryption, and I've said this before to people: make sure that you backed up that phone before you do this, because if at any point you stop the encryption process, it will brick your phone, and you'll have to start from scratch, and you'll lose any information you had. So you want to make sure you do that. Do that at night. Set up the encryption and make sure that runs overnight. That way you won't be interrupting it. And also, you want to encrypt any external SD cards that you have, because information can end up in those hands. So again, encrypt that information. Password protect your devices. You've got to make sure all those devices are password protected and encrypted. That again, will save you so much. And review those business associates. We have an example coming up, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some specific examples that we've seen, what the fines look like, and what they could have done to stop that from happening in the first place. Sort of use it as a learning experience. But it's really important that you make sure that business associates are doing what they say they're going to do, and you have a signed and countersigned agreement, and that you keep that on in your files, and that you can access that in case there's a problem.